Right, hey, so welcome back again. We've now got our setup where we can actually punch holes out of stuff, which is pretty cool. We need to talk a little bit here, though, about structure, because we've already said this isn't a system designed for a game, per se. If it was a game, we'd know exactly how we want to set this up. I have chosen to put all of this on hit because it made sense as a trigger at the time, and because I want to show you the flexibility and the different options we have. There's a really big problem with sort of YouTube tutorial side of learning where it's like, oh, here is the way you do this, and there's never one way to do something in the digital sphere like this. There's always a million ways to do it. This situation has two interesting little quirks to it. So for one thing, the shot can kind of bounce around a whole lot. So you get more destruction than you might want. And also, I also just like run over it and eat it like that, which is pretty cool. Maybe that's what you want. You know, maybe that works for you and what you're trying to do. Like, you could do this, you could like make something where you could like run through certain bits of walls and things like that. This is inspiring. There's loads of things I could do with this, but it's not what I want to do, because what I want to do is shoot something and make an impact crater that pops out, with debris that pops out, I should say. It's like I said in the last video, system design is all about trigger, behavior, output. And in this case, the on hit is not quite the trigger I want. The trigger I want is actually the projectile striking something. So it's the projectile that actually triggers the action. But again, remember I said in one of the previous videos, the best practice is that behavior and logic and variables and everything else that are related to one particular object should really be contained within that object. So we want the demolition stuff to be on the destructible actor, which I'm going to rename as soon as we go back in, because it's still called Boolean test actor right now. But we actually want the trigger to be the projectile. So first things first, we're going to switch that up, and then we're going to look at how we get the sort of the plug, like the debris part that comes through. So that's what we're going to look at with this video. So let's start. You know, like I said, let's start with renaming this. It's no longer Boolean test actor. This is now BP Destructible Mesh Actor. Unreal, when something is open, when it's in memory, I don't really know exactly how these work, but they create these things called redirectors. I keep a show redirectors filter on, and I like to right click and say fix up, which gets rid of the redirector. Be careful, because getting rid of the redirector is a little destructive. It can cause issues, but so make sure I've not actually caused an issue here. No, it's all still working fine. Okay. So we've got all of this logic here that works, and if we look at this logic right at the start, so coming in here, the only thing that's actually coming into this is the hit location. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag a square over all of this stuff, and I'm going to say collapse to function. And that function automatically has an input. Let's rename that input node to hit location. And let's rename this function to, I called it sphere punch when I came up with this, because we're punching out a ragged sphere from our object. You can call it what you like, as long as it makes sense, as long as you can keep track of what it's doing. That's the main thing. Let's just make sure we've not broken anything. Nah, it's still working. Now, delete that reference to that function, because that is a reference to the function is still here. And what we actually want to get is our projectile. And, you know, I'm going to go ahead and I'm not going to delete this because you may want to do something with it. I don't think I'm going to, but I'm going to keep it anyway, just in case. You know what? I'm going to do this the other way around. I'm going to move this out here because this keeps this in this comment box, so it's nice and neat and tidy. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say, so this is a reference to the other actor that has been struck by the projectile. I'm going to cast this to the Destructible Mesh actor. And then I'm just going to say Spear Punch at the hit location. Sounds like a bad indie song. Grab this, and so now that works, but it's not, I can't smoosh this by walking on it. Okay, so that's our first change made. Now, what we want to do is when we punch a hole in this thing, we want to retain the piece that comes out. And there's two important things to discuss here. The first is that I said right back at the start that a system designer has to be able to think in real world terms and also in sort of like digital game world terms. And it's really easy to talk about what we're doing in real world terms and say like we're blowing a hole in something, we're punching a hole in something. But, you know, punching a hole would suggest that like there is a whole piece coming out alongside alongside us making the hole. That's not happening here because we're not actually punching a hole in anything. We're deforming a mesh with a hole shape. So you have to also think this through in logical terms. What is the process by which we create that other piece? So we're creating another dynamic mesh, so we know we need to make another dynamic mesh. We want that dynamic mesh to be based off the current dynamic mesh of the actor. And then we want to Boolean that, and if you remember, the Boolean process has different operations. So we actually want the intersection of our tool mesh and the original mesh, or a copy of the original mesh. Okay, so all of this complex stuff, all those cool things that we can do, and this is the key thing to system design, and this is the key thing to stuff like this destructible mesh task. It's not really about the complex math stuff. The complex math stuff is great, and this is why I like system design and don't really call myself a programmer, because I'm not really into that complex math stuff. That was done by some sort of wizard at Epic Games, who I owe everything to for this video series. And this is what it's like when I worked in the past on games. You know, I had programmers I worked with, I had a tech lead that I worked with who I owed everything to. My job was to do the sit between the back-end programmers and the guys putting the gameplay together, make something really, really cool. And all of this cool stuff about destructible environments, we're just coming up with the steps. It's just logic. It's just, how do I take the existing tools that have already been made? The making of the tools is the crazy programming part. How do I take these tools and apply them in the right order, in the right steps? And it's really just that logic and processing part that makes you a good system designer. So we need to duplicate that mesh, get the intersection of it, without disrupting the process of the current hole punching system. Okay? And we want to think about that. So the other thing, before we go into this, is structure. So, just talked about this a second ago, we want the destruction stuff to stay within the object. But this other piece that we're breaking out, I don't really want that piece to be destructible. That's going to start to get complicated. I want this to just be its own thing. So I think for the purpose of this test, I'm going to make that as a separate actor. Doesn't mean you have to do the same thing. You might have a different interpretation, you might branch off at this point. I'm going to make that a separate actor so that it's not destructible. Okay, so let's get back into this right now. One of the first things I'm going to do is I don't want the bullets to bounce around inside and make multiple things. I want to destroy the bullet when it hits the actor. And then I go into sphere punch. So we know we need to create a new actor somewhere along here. Let's make that new actor first. Let's go back to destruction, blueprint class, actor. And I'm going to call this BP debris. Debris actor? No, debris. Now, what we want is when we spawn our debris, we want to create a dynamic mesh. So we're going to add a dynamic mesh component. Same as we did before, we're going to promote this. I'm going to call it mesh component, and a dynamic mesh component. And again, if you don't like having things named after the type that they are, which is probably not the best thing to do, choose another name. But let's get the dynamic mesh. Promote that to a variable. So this is the dynamic mesh. Now, we want to take in the current dynamic mesh of the thing that we're making debris from. So add a variable of type dynamic mesh. I'm going to call it incoming dynamic mesh. I'm going to expose this variable and I'm going to put it expose on spawn. So when we make this, this should come in. But just because I like to try and teach best practice whenever I remember to do these things, what if we accidentally spawn this without this? Well, we could get a validated get here, but yeah, I'm going to do that. So let's make sure that this incoming dynamic mesh is valid, and if it is not valid, I'm going to do a print string and say let's put an append here and say debris actor ref to self. Does not have a valid incoming mesh. Okay, so if I see that, I know what's gone wrong. Assuming that the dynamic mesh is valid, then we want to take our dynamic mesh and we want to set this to be the same as this. We don't want to just set it to be that though, because you have to remember instancing. So that is one instance of this dynamic mesh. We want a separate instance that has the same properties. We don't want it to be the exact same one. If I just said set dynamic mesh to be that, it would be a reference to the same mesh. We want to keep these as separate instances. We want them to be the same. So to have the same properties. So if I type in here copy, you know, again, it's this thing of like, we could go back to the API and we could scroll through the API the more traditional way. But because of the context sensitive nature of Unreal, we can just type in copy, which is the most likely word that they used, and immediately copy mesh to mesh. Look at that, lovely. So we actually want to, it plugs this in from the to the from by default. We actually want the incoming dynamic mesh to be in from, and the copy to mesh to be here. I say is valid. And then our from mesh here. So we're also going to need the tool mesh component. I'm going to take the component for the tool mesh rather than the dynamic mesh itself, because we need the position of the tool mesh component. So we need to get the component itself. So dynamic mesh component, and we're going to call this tool mesh component. Again, I'm going to say expose on spawn. Again, I'm going to do a validated get on this. And I'm going to say this, and again, just so I like to make sure I'm showing you guys good practice, do this, and say debris actor does not have valid tool mesh component. Okay, so again, if something breaks, I know what broke. So we have the tool mesh component, and we want to boolean our dynamic mesh. So let's go back, let's get our dynamic mesh, and we want to perform a bool operation, apply mesh boolean. We want to get the intersection. Okay. So we're going to get the intersection of this with the tool mesh component. We need to get the dynamic mesh from this. So valid. And there gives us our tool mesh. The relative transform. Okay, so that is the relative transform of that to its original mesh, which means we need to keep these the same. We need our debris mesh to be matched up to the other mesh. Keep that in mind. Okay, so we're applying our mesh boolean here. That should be enough for now. So we generate a sphere for the tool mesh. We need that. We apply Perl and noise, and then we're applying the mesh boolean. Now we want to make the debris mesh before we punch the hole in the other mesh, because we're using the other mesh to do this. So here, let's make some more spacing, see what's going on. Here we are going to spawn our actor for class for our debris mesh. Okay, and you can see it's got its incoming dynamic mesh and tool component there. Our spawn transform, we want it to match this actor, so let's get actor transform, plug that in there. Incoming dynamic mesh is the dynamic mesh, and the tool mesh component is the tool mesh component. There we go. Okay, I don't think we need to do anything else with the debris actor, so I'm not going to promote this to a variable and store it. Let's test this, and let's hope this works. There we go. So it just looks like a sort of big splat, but right now what that is doing is creating a new mesh that is sitting exactly in the hole that we created with the other behavior. So we're one step closer. Now obviously it's not got its materials. So let's go back here and let's recreate the materials component. So remember, there was that whole thing of we need it to hold materials and material instances. So we actually need a material interface array. Let's do materials. And again, open, expose on spawn. And then over here, let's say dynamic mesh component. Configure material list. That's the one we want. Get materials. Okay. Now, here's where it's going to get interesting. In order for this to be able to behave as though it has physics, it's going to require collision. So again, we're going to do our collision. Well, we know it's collision from, there we go. Set dynamic mesh collision from mesh. And do a reroute node because we've got a few things to do with that component. Okay, so we're going to get our dynamic mesh here. Now keep in mind, these things are snug. They are identical. So this is probably already going to kind of pop out or behave a little strangely if we were to add physics to it. Now, with our larger mesh, we set the collision as complex. One of the problems is if we want to run physics on something, we have to use simple collision. And if you try and use the complex collision as simple collision, it's going to block the ability to run physics. So we want to keep this as simple collision. That's what's going to create problems because the simple collision is not going to fit snugly into that box. So let's do this. But for now, let's just set collision enabled. Query and physics. And then we're going to simulate physics. So set simulate physics checked. Let's just see what happens. So my theory here is this is already going to pop out and act weird because it's so snug and then it's using that. Nope. Oh, there it is there. Right. Oh, it's not got materials on it. So the problem here is the materials aren't being set properly. I didn't feed the materials in, did I? There we go. This, I swear I didn't plan this, but this is exactly why, see what I forgot to do here? I did not do a validated get of those materials and it's the first time we're getting them. Had I put in a validated get of materials here, I'll do that just now just so you can see. This is I'm going to leave this mistake in and not edit around it just so that you can appreciate why this mistake was made. So say get. Can I do a validated get? I can't do a validated get. Okay. Can I do is valid? Okay, so it's a little tricky to do. So, the reason this didn't work is that I'm not feeding in the... Let's hook this back up again. Okay. So the reason this didn't work is, unlike with the other variables, I didn't do a validated get on this. Okay, so the reason that I didn't see this coming was, unlike the other variables, I didn't do a validated get on the materials. Now you can't actually do a validated get on an array because it'll just come back empty. But that's what things like this are, why you should really do things like this. Do checks when you're feeding in a variable. Can I check empty is not empty? So let's branch. Okay, true. I put print string down here, and I'm going to append that. Let's say no materials fed into debris actor. Okay, and now what will happen is no materials fed into debris actor. So I am not feeding in the materials. So let's try this. Let's see, and yeah, it's kind of working. It's, like I said, it's going a little bit crazy because of the physics, but it's kind of working now. So there we have it. Seems like a good place to take a break. In the next video, we'll look at doing some cool stuff with that debris. If you come up with anything cool with this, if you branch this off and do your own thing with it, you know, hit me up with a comment, let me know. There's the whole like and subscribe thing. I really appreciate it. It kind of helps out the channel. Otherwise, I will see you in the next video for some cool stuff. Thanks, guys.